Good afternoon, good evening, and good day. Thank you all for joining this webinar. This is actually a series of webinar. I am presenting it from APJ. As you can see, the slide, I hope slide is visible, Ivy. Yeah.
All good.
So, yeah, as you can see, I've added my coordinates on this slide. My name is Virendra Chaurasia. I have been in the IT industry for 22 years, and my role here at Veeam India is to, focus on BFSI and enterprise sector, and that spans across the India. The intent of today having this webinar is to, give you an understanding of how a Kasten, you know, a demo or a Kasten pod can be deployed onto your workstation or maybe laptops. Because if you have to demonstrate or you have to do some hands-on related to Kasten learning, in spite of waiting for a platform to be created on any of the hyperscaler or in the Kubernetes platform, in spite of waiting for that, you can actually install a Minikube, which is a small version of Kubernetes onto your laptop. So this session is going to talk about how do we deploy Minikube in laptop, and then how do we, you know, uh, explore through the different options of Kasten on the laptop, and you can also do some hands-on learning going forward if you have this Minikube on your laptop. So moving on to a next slide. Okay, if you will scan this QR code, it will land you to a guide that is posted onto a GitHub here. So this is the guide. I'll wait for a second because there could be a bandwidth delay and you will see the screen little delayed in manner. So this is the guide that you will get to see once you scan the QR code. Okay. So this guide talks about, how to install a Minikube onto your laptop, then required tools that helps you configure Kubernetes and also helps you extract the packages that needs to be installed, maybe data services, it could be certain namespaces or the S3 buckets and all, right? So again, switching back to the slide, if you guys have done this, you may get to see a, a link that opens up this guide. Okay, so I'll come to this guide post the presentation. Let me walk you through what how the architecture looks like when we are talking about uh, Minikube on laptop, right? So the lab diagram is like this. Okay, we have a local laptop, or it could be workstation, or it could be a desktop on which you have installed your Mac, Windows, or Linux. It is compatible with all these three flavors of operating system that run on end devices. Okay, and then this is how a Minikube architecture looks like. It can run either over VMware workstation or maybe Hyper-V, hypervisor that most of the latest operating system on laptops offer, or you can have your Docker runtime engine from Docker providers, and it could be a Docker desktop. So on top of it, what we do, we create a Minikube which will have a microservice running with MongoDB. It will have a node that is created for the cluster, and then we will install Kasten on top of it. So all this is going to run in your laptop. I mean, in case here today, I will be running it on my laptop, but if you follow this guide and this webinar going forward, you will be able to run it on your laptop as well. And let me move to the next slide, which talks about how the environment looks like. Okay, so Minikube is actually a tool that runs a smaller version of Kubernetes locally onto your laptop. To run that, we would be using a couple of tools like uh, kubectl and Helm. So kubectl helps you uh, configure Kubernetes, and Helm is actually a package manager which helps you manage the the package charts that you can download or clone it from open GitHub repositories. So installation steps is there already on the web, which which the QR code is gonna talk about. So we will refer step by step on the web page as well as to what steps needs to be followed to get this environment ready. Okay. And like I mentioned, kubectl is actually a tool which allows you to interact with the Kubernetes platform so that you can do a configuration, a change management, or doing any configuration onto the Kubernetes. And same time, when you have kubectl, you will also require Helm, which will help you to do you know uh, interact with packages to help you deploy, delete, modify the application that you or data services that you're gonna deploy onto a particular cluster. So what we are gonna create actually here is one node cluster of Kubernetes, and on that one node cluster we'll be creating multiple namespace. So this is what we are gonna do. Okay, so yeah, so let me directly jump onto a demo how it works. So sorry, yeah, I think the mouse ran over. Yeah, so here we are. So let me skip to the uh, you know yeah the web page. Let it appear, and then probably I can explain you how uh, it can be installed and what it means on your particular system. So the first one, if you see after the barcode, there will be a link, and there is a link to webinar. You can refer the link to webinar, so you can bookmark this page. It will help you reach to a webinar link as well, wherein you will be able to refer this webinar time and again. Okay, installing Minikube, there is a hyperlink wherein if you click on that, it gives you a particular version of Minikube that needs to be installed, right? So if you are running Windows, it gives you uh, a guide for Windows. If you are running Mac OS, it talks about how to install it on Mac OS, and if you are running it on Linux, it talks about Linux. It can be a binary download, it can be a Debian package, or it can be a RPM package, right? So if you are running any of the other processor like ARM64, ARM version 7, or PPC, if you are privileged to use that kind of processors on your system, even there's a specified guide for each of those particular hardware as well, right? So going back to this project, so once you are done with installing Minikube, that's actually a small package which can be installed. It is actually an executable, okay, that runs onto your laptop. But before you actually do that, you should ensure that you either have hypervisor enabled onto your laptop. If it is Windows based, you can use Hyper-V or VMware Workstation, or if it is Linux based, you can use all the other hypervisors supported on to Linux. So in this demo here, what we are going to showcase it to you, we are actually run it on Docker. Okay, so I have installed Docker desktop on my machine. I'll also show it to you. Where is that? So one second. So let me switch to a window which talks about Docker that I have installed onto my machine. Hope it is visible to you all on the screen, because it takes a little time to refresh the screen. So the Docker desktop, if you see here, I have a single node created as webinar demo, and that's the Docker single node cluster that I have on my laptop created. Okay, so I spoke about kubectl and Helm. So there is also a GitHub repository called Arcade. You can clone that, or you can install Helm and kubectl onto your machine to support these commands to change and apply any modifications into your Kubernetes platform, right? So once that is done, this is the command that we have to run, because once Minikube is installed, you will have to start the Minikube that will actually you know create a cluster. So what we have done here, if you see this command, we have executed a command which says uh, Minikube start. Then we have added some attributes to it by adding on to volume snapshots capability, and also the CSI host part driver. Okay, and we have also specified the attribute which talks about what API server at which port API server should run. So we have specified that as well here, and we have specified the container um, container mode that it has to use. So in this case, what we are saying, that container runtime equals to container D. So we'll be creating a container D type workload, which is what you could see here. If you see the Docker window, which I actually showcase, should be on your screen, right? So this is actually a container D container that we are running, right? And this container D, and then after that we have specified the name of that namespace or a particular cluster. So that's a webinar demo. Okay, and we have then specified the version. So what it means for you, one second. So if you see, this is what the name of the cluster is, and how it look like, because in my laptop it is already pre-installed. So how it look like for you, that's here, right? So yeah, I hope you can see the console here, right? So the kubectl is allowed to execute on your laptop. So if you can see, I am allowed to execute kubectl here, and then once I'm allowed to execute. If you see, this is what the command I have executed, the one which was visible onto the guide. The same command is executed here. So this command have actually started creating Minikube, same version that has been defined, or the latest one which was available. Okay, and then from there, if you see, it creates a Kubernetes 1.25 environment, and then it restarts the existing Docker container after the installation, pulling base image, and it installs the entire Kubernetes cluster onto your machine, right? In this case, it is actually a laptop. Okay, so let me switch over to the not presentation, to the guide that we were referring. Okay, so this command is executed. It to run this command successfully, you need to have one of the container runtime engine running in backend. It could be Hyper-V based container engine, or it could be let's say your VMware based workstation, or it could be Docker desktop. So in my case, it is Docker desktop. So because it was accessed and enabled to run, I could run this successfully. Now after that, I have actually created some node related to CSI host path and Kasten classes that's been defined here. So if you again I roll over to the console that we were running here. So after installation, if you see, I have actually given the node, and that node is successfully run. And then once that node was executed, okay, this node was executed, we then started changing the storage class, right? So in my laptop, I have followed this. I've changed the storage class, and I also changed the storage class standard to, not to use standard, rather use the CSI host path that we have defined in here, right? So once you're done with this, okay, then the time comes that wherein you have to deploy Kasten, okay, and to deploy Kasten, you should be allowed to use Helm. So Helm chart should be allowed to either installed into the Minikube that you are running, or it should be allowed to run from the same console. In case of my laptop, I have actually made my laptop enabled for Helm as well, and I could run it from the my laptop, right? So if you see on the console here, if I go to, okay, and I say I want to run Helm, and I then go back here, copy this command and say install K10 here. Okay, it says it is already exist. Okay, so in your case, if it is not there, it will start installing, you know uh, creating a repo from this particular location. And once that is done, you can also install it from Arcade if you have actually cloned the Arcade repo onto your machine. But if you're not using Arcade, you can just use Helm, and Helm can create that Kasten repository. And once that is done, you can create a namespace. So even if I execute this namespace here, if you see, let me go back to the console and execute the namespace, it will say it is already in existence, right? So both of this can be executed from your laptop. And once you do that, okay, next is a step wherein you will have to push an image to this namespace, right? And that's what we are doing. We are actually helming, and we are actually instructing this machine to install Kasten into a namespace called Kasten IO. Okay, and then we are also setting some authentication rules, which is predefined in the package that has been downloaded to the repository, right? So what we are saying that use this package using Helm, and then push it to a namespace called Kasten IO, right? So this installs a particular Kasten IO. So if you want to see what is running in Kasten IO, uh, it will talk about, this is how you see on the console. If you run this command, it talks about, so since it is installed in my machine, if you run this command on your laptop, it will install a particular set of uh, services that Kasten runs, right? So Kasten uses some gateway services, some dashboard services, some crypto control manager, everything. So you get to see all this is running post you install Kasten onto your machine. Or while it install, it takes around 20 to 30 minutes, subjected to the kind of hardware you're trying to load it on. At times it can go a little higher as well if your laptop is of a slower version, or if you're running a really a better configuration in a laptop, it can complete in less than 10 minutes. So once this Kasten is installed onto your Kubernetes cluster, you can say that run this port forwarding. Okay, the moment you do run this port forwarding, if you want to see that port forwarding, it is already here. Okay, so I have done that port forwarding, and the moment I do the port forwarding, I will be able to access uh, Kasten from a particular web browser. Okay, so if you see here, I am allowed to access the Kasten which runs on this port. So if you see, this is actually running in my local machine. That's the local NIC address that we use, and it runs on port 8080. That's the port forwarding we have done on this screen. If you see, we have actually forwarded gateway port 8080, and we have said, okay, use port 8080 instead of 8000, right? So once the Kasten is installed and you are able to browse it using this, so same script, same things, if you follow, you'll be able to end up seeing what I'm showcasing in this webinar, right? So the screens will look similar, the IP addresses, everything will be intact, if you follow this guide. So we are through till here. We are able to see the console of Kasten, but that's not it. We will have to actually authenticate to a particular machine. So we have used token to authenticate in this. So after token, you will be able to see the screen which I have just showcased it to you. So this comes of post we authenticate it, And after Kasten authentication, what we need to do is that we have to deploy some data services, or maybe let's say some namespaces into the cluster, so that it needs a protection. So in this case, what I'm doing, I'm creating a pacman as a data service first. For that, actually you have to run it from a console. It has to be actually from the Kubernetes console, so it will not be executed from C command, C dollar. So for that, actually I'm using a YSL, or it is called WSL console, right? So from WSL console, you'll be able to create the pacman name service. So once you create a pacman name service, I'll explain it to you where it is created. Once you do that, you will have to do port forwarding. Okay. And once you do a port forwarding, same as what we have done for Kasten, you will be able to access this data services called pacman on this particular console. So this is just a name services or a data namespace created for you to show that a, a particular workload that runs a pacman web services needs to have a protection. So one, what we have created is pacman. Second, what we are doing, we are actually installing a mini IO. So for that, again, you'll have to do a helming, and after, I mean, you have to repo it from the location. Once the helm repo is created, you'll have to push that to a namespace. So the install helming is done, and then it is creating a namespace called mini IO operator, right? And once mini IO operator is created, you also say that uh, access this mini IO. To access this mini IO, if you have observed, when it comes to all this Kubernetes, you need to have an access key, right? So once this mini IO operator is installed, execute this command. It gives you an access key, and that access key is used to log into a mini IO operator, right? So this is what mini IO operator that we have installed it as data services. Why we have done that? Because we are actually using you know S3 bucket that is a common, or S3 compatible, or a open S3 bucket, which is getting deployed into my laptop. So this mini IO operator, which is part of the same namespace in the cluster, allows you to create S3 bucket. So if you see here, I have created a temporary bucket here. Okay. And and to add that temporary bucket, actually you have to go to service account. Okay, it says refuse to connect, so maybe I will have to use key here. Let me go to, I'll use a key here. So this requires a key that was copied here. Here, if you insert the key, you log in, it goes into your page. So this key actually came out of this command. So I have saved that key, and that key needs to be saved even when you access it. That's a common key which will be required to access your mini IO console. So once you get output of this, actually output, I'll show you how it looks like. Actually the output looks like something. If I have it here, this is how the output looks like. So I have actually base coded this. So once I do that, this is the key that I'm gonna use. Okay, so this key is what I have actually used to log in, and that is how I am allowed to get into a mini IO. And in mini IO, what I have done, I have actually gone to a tenant, expanded the tenant. In tenant, if I say manage tenant, within manage tenant, I have gone to service account, created the service account. Okay, and in this service account, there is a proper a service key, sorry, secret key and access key that you have to note down before you create a bucket. So what I have done, I have created a bucket called my S3. This bucket is required because Kasten is gonna store all the backups that it will take into this repository, right? So this is a temporary repository or a permanent MyS3 repository which I have created. This is again coming out of data services that we are running in the Kubernetes cluster, right? And that allows us to create S3 bucket. So while I am running a Windows laptop, on Windows laptop, I'm running a Docker container, a desktop version of Docker. In that desktop version of Docker, I have installed a webinar demo cluster that is a single node cluster. Okay, and within that cluster, I'm running all these name services, right? Namespaces. So this namespaces is allowing me to create S3 bucket. I'll showcase it to you where this needs to be configured in the Kasten console, right? So once this S3 bucket is created, what we have to do, we have to go to a Kasten console. We have to go to a setting. So here, if you see in the Kasten console, let me go back to a dashboard here. If you see here, it has automatically discovered there are 3 name services running, okay, or namespaces running. And it takes a little while because, I've got multiple version of hypervisors running on my laptop. I have some workloads, some demos, which is running on VMware workstation. Then I'm also leveraging Hyper-V for some other setup of Scalar Cloud, and that's why you see, it is taking a little time on my laptop. But it's better to be dependent on a particular setup that has to be created onto a hyperscaler, and then go back and do a hands-on, rather you install it in your own system and then do a hands-on, right? So this is how it is taking a little time. Let me see if the port handler is working for this. It is working on the gateway. Let's wait for a while till the time it comes up. So this dashboard, we'll talk about how many application it has, and out of those, how many are compliant, non-compliant, and unmanaged. So what we'll do, meanwhile this comes up, we'll go to settings. In settings, we'll have to actually define a particular S3 bucket that we have created in a mini operator here, right? So in mini operator that we have created called my S3. So we'll go to Kasten and create a profile that guides Kasten to go and write it in a. So let me see. Yeah, so this is the bucket. So meanwhile, while it comes up, let's go through the guide, what we have done to understand. So what we have done, if you see, we have installed a mini IO, and then we have taken a token that you could see on the screen, which was actually conversion of, this was the token that we extracted using echo command and base 64 decode. So if you see here, we are using base 64 decode to find the key. Once that is done, I have logged into a JWT for logging into a console. And once that is done, I have just done a port forwarding, and the port forwarding was done here. If you see, it's running, right? So this is the port forwarding that I have done, kubectl namespace mini operator port forwarded to service console. Okay, so this has to be kept open if you want to keep the services running. And so is this one. It is running for the 8080. So both these ports are running. 8080 is here. If you see, the port forwarding was done for Kasten, and the 900 is done for accessing the mini IO. And once mini IO is done, we have went to tenant, click service account, and copied the access key and the secret key that is required to configure S3. So let me go to the console if it has come up. Okay, so now it has not come up, so no worries. What I will do, I'll go and create a new profile here. Okay, so I say create S3 compatible access key. So I have actually stored the access key here. Uh, so this is the access key for that bucket to be accessed. I say use this access key to configure the bucket which is created in Mini.io, and then I say use a secret key. So I installed a secret key here from the same Mini.io bucket, and I say endpoint URL. So the endpoint URL, if you see, it was already mentioned in the guide here that the endpoint URL that has to be used is Mini.io. This is the URL that has to be configured in the endpoint console. So here we say skip certification. It will pop up with disable SSL verify because it is in the laptop, so I don't want to do any because I'm not going out of my laptop. And then I say save the profile, right? So I will have to say bucket name, it was my S3, and here I say new, it's a naming convention, so new S3, okay, and I just save it. Yeah, it says please be patient because one of the services is actually, so at times when laptop is running some other services in backend, right, backups also, so it takes little time, so it's slow to respond is what it says, right? So we'll have to wait for, see here it says it's slow to respond if you have questions. So what we'll do, we'll just wait for some time while it comes up, uh, and we'll meanwhile go through the guide that you know it describes. So what we'll do next going forward is that this is where we configure a bucket in the console that is created. This is how it is guiding. A bucket was created, and then that bucket is going to get configured into S3 location, right? So we have gone to settings here. If you see, click on settings of Kasten, then go to a location, select S3 compatible, enter your access key and the secret key that was saved earlier, then provide the endpoint name, and then provide the bucket name you configure, and then click the save profile. And that's what we did here, right? So if we go back to the console here, that's what we did, right? We have created a new bucket. We have selected S3 compatible. So from settings, we have gone to location, new profile. New profile, we have created uh, the new S3 compatible. We have given access key and the secret key, and then we are saving that policy, right? So maybe if it is what I'll do here, let me kill the the 1 second. Let me kill this and maybe restart this. So this is what it says. It was actually having some issue. So I'll close this and I'll say okay, run this again. Okay, so what I'll do here, I'll go back to the port forwarding. I'll refresh this probably. Yeah, so if you see, there was a problem that was delaying it. So what I have done, actually I have killed the key, the port forwarding which was running for long, and it was actually having some problem here, right? So what I did, I actually killed it, and I have done names for again forwarding, and you see the response has come up again. So this is what we have added. If we edit this is what we have done. I have actually created my K10 bucket. This is standard one. I have given some keys and all, and then the bucket that was created in Mini.io operator was my S3, and it has connected to the same S3 endpoint API that was to be called, right? So this was one we created, right? My S3, and the same has been configured here, right? But for us the name is actually my 10k bucket, right? So let's go back to dashboard. Here if you see, there are 3 applications that is configured in the K10 console. So what K10 does, it goes and makes API call to the master node, and then it discovers the namespace that is created in the cluster, right? And then it populates those into this dashboard, and it also gives you a understanding as to how many of those uh, namespaces are actually compliant, non-compliant, or unmanaged, right? So right now we have three applications that is part of this particular cluster, but none of them are compatible compliant, right? Why not compliant? Because there are no policies associated to this namespaces, right? So this one is a default namespace. If you recall, I had created a pacman um, data services using this console here. So if you see here, pacman was created, right? So kubectl create a particular namespace using this YAML file, and then the port forwarding was done, and this was configured, right? So that you get to see here. Okay, the pacman is created, but right now there are none of these are actually protected, right? So what I'll do, I'll go and I'll create a policy, a backup policy for this one, and I say today's 16 number. This is all in small letters. I'll say testing point of view, sorry. Okay, I say create snapshot, uh, use a preset. If you want to use any preset or you want to import it, you can import it to import it from some other bucket as well, but that is not required here. That we use when you are actually using some of the exported backups from a different bucket, and you want to incorporate or ingest that into this particular cluster. So we use that. Here you can set, if you have daily, you can set your snapshot about time it should run. If you want to set weekly, whether it has to run every Sundays and all that, you can set how many copies required. So that can be configured in the, so right now I'll say let's go on demand. So I'll say enable backup via snapshot, and I say it has to be exported to this bucket. So if you say this bucket, this is the bucket which is actually added into our location profile. So it says go to this location. So in Kasten, I have used a bucket name as my K10 bucket, but in backend it is actually a S3 compatible bucket which is going into mini IO data services that we have spinned in the cluster, right? So I select a file, I say export snapshot, and then I say okay, search by name, and I say I want to protect pacman. Okay, I can select resources, whether all the resources needs to be protected, or I need to select some artifacts that needs to be protected, right? So I can do inclusion filter here, or I can do exclusion filter both here, right? So if I say inclusion, I can do group wise, resource wise, or label wise. I can add that filter, or I can exclude. So in this case, I'll say take the entire namespace, and then just create a policy, right? I can also, if you have seen, I can also do a pre and post commands added to this using YAML file. So if you see here, we have a policy created which is valid for pacman, okay, created on 6th November, but this has not run any time, right? So I say first time I say run once, and it runs. Now it's been triggered to take a backup of this pacman namespace. And if we go back to a dashboard, we'll see that a particular job is triggered, and it is there in the action, right? So it is taking an action about application, and it is triggered. So there are once this is done, it will say it is completed, and the moment that is completed, you will see in spite of unmanaged, it will say that one of the services compliant, and two of them are uncompliant, right? So while it is executing and running the policy and gonna take time, we'll just go through settings as to what you can do extra. You can ingest some of the blueprints that need to be added to your manifesto, or you can also configure disaster recovery here. If you're running a licensed version, you can add license here in case if in your case you're running, okay, and you can customize the dashboard if you want to, right? So this can be customized as per your uh, wish list, and this is the console wherein you have to create RBAC, right? So you can create multiple users, you can customize their role, and you allowed a particular action to that particular user. For example, in this case, we have this user and he's got the admin rights. So you can also create some specific rights here, and then um, uh, so RBAC control can be managed through this console, this point or this tab. So let's go back to dashboard and see if the job is completed. Yeah, so it's not yet. Let me refresh it. So this is what it is doing. It has started today at 3:43. We are at 3:45. It will take a bit. So it has created a workload pacman snapshot. Now it is working on application components. So so what we have done, we have actually said to protect the entire namespace, right? So one, it is creating a backup. Second, it will be exporting it. So if I had not selected export, it would have not export it to the bucket. But here, we have selected exporting as well. So it will export it to a bucket in the S3. If you are in between, if you see that there are something that is wrongly selected, you can go and cancel the action as well, right? So in this case, something is failed, maybe something wrong in the services, but this is how a particular job can be seen. So if you see here, total action, 3 actions, yeah, out of which 1 running action, 1 failed, and 1 skipped, right? So this is how extensive dashboard is given to you for the Kasten. And once this is done, you can see here in restore right now, because it has not taken the entire copy, it says 0. Here too it says 0. So once, yeah, so this is all real time. If you see, it started reporting, right? So we'll say, and so what I'll do, I'll go here, I'll stop the exporting. So while it completes the second job I have executed, wherein I am not exporting it, I'm just creating a vanilla backup just to showcase it to you, how the backup is created, and then from that backup copy, how can we, do a restoration. So if you click on this, it talks about, so when, if it fails here, that means while we have configured this, the snapshotting capability that was to be given to this particular storage class volume snapshot, this has not been added on perfectly, is what it will mean. But then let's wait and see what it does. So 51% is done. It is still doing. So while we were talking about creating policy, right, while it runs, so when you go to particular with this thing and you create policy, you can also export these policies, right? For example, mini operator, you can export these policies into YAML for future reference. So whatever you select here, that can be saved as YAML and can be imported into or ingested into any of your manifesto or CI/CD pipeline, right? That you would be running it for your CI/CD strategy. So that also is possible through this. This can be exported as YAML and ingested into uh, 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 Kubernetes manifesto or the CI/CD pipeline. So let's see what's the status. This is still running. Yeah, it looks like Snapshot application component is having some issue in the services that I am running that may need a troubleshooting, but then this is how you can see Kasten, you can configure the policy, you can create policy for. So let's try to do it on the other one, which is mini IO operator, and we say that I want to take a snapshot. This is testing. I'll create on demand. I say enable backup via snapshot. So this is required when you do it cross cluster. So I'm not doing it cross cluster. I say mini IO operator. I can select the app that needs to be. I say filter resources, add resources. Okay, and I just say put it in the bucket. And okay, so if we now for the mini operator, so we had two policies for Pacman. Now we have a policy for this one, and let's run it for this, and let's observe it, right? So let's go to dashboard. Now we have created another one. So policy run. This is for mini operator. Yeah, it has created the application snapshots as well, and this completed 100%. So for Pacman, I think there was something wrong in the S3 bucket. So if now I say, it will say, okay, one has run successfully and it is completed. So now if I go to here and I go to restore points, now you see for this one, because none of the backups were completed, I do not have any restore point. It says 0 here and 0 here, right? But for this one is completed successfully, so I have a restore point here. I can go to a restore if I have to and select this particular restore point and say what I have to do, how I have to restore, right? Should I restore it as new, or should I restore it as a new namespace? So I say that I want to restore it as new namespace. I will name it as mini mini IO new. Okay, and then I say select all the artifacts that needs to be restored. So for example, here it says the command it is going to use. I can use this command also if I have to restore it from console, or I have to put this into any of my script there where it needs to be added into uh, any of the CI/CD pipeline. I can copy this and put into that as well. So this operator was protected, and now I am pushing it to a new namespace. And now here if you see, I say uh, I don't want to restore. Here I say artifacts. I can select a particular artifact that should be protected, right? So I say I don't need config maps. I just need deployments and namespace or the secret. But in this case, I'll say restore entire namespace to a different and spin it as a new namespace, right? So it will create a new namespace once the restore is done. So I'm saying restore it. Now let's go back to our dashboard. It will have a job running as restore, and if we see the job here, so that's just kicked in. So it shows the console restore application component, all phases completed successfully, right? So now if I go and see the application and I refresh, okay, Yeah, so it has restored in the original location. And if I go to the console here and say Control C, cd/cls, kubectl get ns. Yeah, so we have kubectl get node. So we have one node running. We have so many name services running. Let me see now. Okay, so we have run successfully. I think what I go to a restore point, select restore. I think what we did not do was we did not create a click here. So I think once that is done, probably now if you see, you know, the restore is triggered, and the first one was restored into the same location. That happened immediately. You have seen that happened in 17 seconds. The entire namespace was restored into the original location. Now I have actually requested to create a new namespace, right? So the first one actually did not create because we did not click on create namespace. So it actually went and got stored into the same namespace. Okay, it took 17 seconds, and the new one, see the difference. Once you know, the namespace was in place, I have created a new namespace. Now you see, in spite of 3, we have 4 namespaces. So the new namespace is automatically rolled out. Okay, and this is where you see a new namespace, exactly the replica of this is created, and that can be used as references. Now let me go back to command here. When we actually have seen the namespaces, now you see there is additional namespace added, right? The second last from down, just above pacman, the mini io new is added, right? So I've not just restored it to a new namespace, I've actually created new namespace from the copy that was there, right? So if I have to spin more microservices of application, you know, the Kasten helps you to do uh, spin more microservices from the same restore points, right? So that's the beauty of it. And I think with this we are almost done. So I open this to a question and answer session. Ivy, are there any questions that need to be handled? Am I audible, Ivy?
I don't think there are any questions.
So yeah, I think we are in time. We are just a minute away from the scheduled demo. So team, thank you so much for your patience and time. I have you know, displayed my coordinates on the first slide of the email. You can note it down again if you wish to. This is my coordinates. 1 second. Yeah, here. So if you need to, you know, raise any questions, queries that you don't have right now, but you want to get those clarified post this webinar, you can drop me an email on this email address. I'll be more than happy to, you know, respond to your queries.